So welcome everybody to our second webinar in relation to Hereford Park, the opportunity to invest in the Hereford Park kiwifruit orchard limited partnership. Just at the outset, important to be clear, we are seeking wholesale investors to be part of this limited partnership, and we'll talk in some detail a bit later about how you qualify as a wholesale investor. In terms of the investment, this is a investment in kiwifruit orchards is long-term in nature. We've been working with Southern Cross Horticulture for almost 4 years now. We have completed 4 of these projects, raising in excess of $100 million of equity, and that's really across about 60 investors to date. The people who invest in these type of projects are long-term, and by long-term we mean 10-year type horizon at least, and they are seeking generally seeking consistent running yields. So people who are looking for yield, a lot of people who are professionals who've been working hard and earning good money and are now thinking about the future and how they can generate income when they're no longer working quite so hard. So the returns that these projects generate are a combination of they're driven by running yield, which is growing fruit and selling it. But there are other elements. There is the potential for capital appreciation over time, and we build that into our return, albeit in a quite a conservative way. And there are also some tax benefits that may be available to investors in the first years while the orchard is being established before it becomes productive. And because it's in a limited partnership structure, which is a look-through for tax purposes, the operating losses of the limited partnership can be streamed directly back to the investors, who may apply them to other income in the first 2 to 3 years. And that is quite a...
David, I think it's probably important to note that we don't build that into our return profile because it varies so much across people. But potentially important element.
Yeah, it does vary across people, Andrew, but it really is a timing difference, because there will be tax losses available, and if you're holding the investment in a vehicle which doesn't have other assessable income, when the orchard starts to produce assessable income, you'll obviously have the benefit of those tax losses at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Andrew's going to do most of the talking today. He's the chief executive of Southern Cross Horticulture. He's a leading figure in the kiwifruit industry. I would describe him as a very principled guy who drives his business hard. He works probably a little bit too hard in my view, but he is very focused on not standing still in this industry. The industry right now is producing nice, very, very healthy returns, but Andrew is always looking forward to the next advance in the industry, and drives the business pretty hard. He also is very focused on the culture of his company and the values by which they operate. And I suppose we see a bit of window dressing around values from time to time with certain companies. The values that we'll talk about today are absolutely real for Andrew and for the Southern Cross Horticulture team, and they live and breathe them. I'll hand over to you, Andrew.
You could add to that we're completely imperfect.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take you through Zespri, and then we'll work sort of deductively from Zespri down through SCH to the Hereford Park opportunity. So if we go to the next slide, guys. there's a few things that make Zespri very unique, and it's really important for anybody that comes into the industry that they buy into these things. If you don't sort of believe in the key tenets of these things, then you wouldn't believe in having a single point of entry. So in the 80s, kiwifruit went through a period of growth where there were many sellers in the market. There was a really big growth in supply. That culminated a poor ability to sell fruit and people cutting each other in the market. In the 90s, a group of kind of key industry leaders got together and thought, well, how can we make this better? And the way that they came up with was to ask the government to regulate the kiwifruit industry to be a single desk, so that all kiwifruit grown in New Zealand needed to be sold through Zespri, except that was sent to Australia. So for almost all of the markets, everything has to go through Zespri. That's been a key tenet of our success. And a way to think about that, where you say, well, hey, gold's a patented variety, so it's hard to measure what a single desk is doing there, is to think about Hayward in New Zealand, which is available all over the world. Hayward growers from other Southern Hemisphere countries, such as Chile, receive about 4.5 times less per kilo than a New Zealand Hayward grower. So the Zespri brand does a phenomenal job of creating value in the market, and it enables us to focus on the early stages of the supply chain. That leads to us being better at what we do. So single point is a really important thing. That has led to a global brand that's really powerful. And more recently, in the last sort of 15 years, you've had plant variety rights through breeding programs add a lot of value into the industry through better products. So Sun Gold is one of those, and it's the key one. Although there's some newer sort of red varieties coming out now. But Sun Gold is a patented product that's patented in New Zealand up to 2039. A little bit longer than most of the markets that we sell to. So that adds a lot of strength because it gives supply control. So there's not unbridled planting and then Zespri having to sell more than we've been able to grow the demand in the market. That element of supply control has enabled Zespri to maintain high fruit prices by growing demand ahead of supply. So those first 3 points, single point of entry, plant variety rights, and a really strong brand and supply chain, all dovetail together to create a strong industry. The future of a strong industry is us continuing to innovate quickly, so that we have the next cab off the rank and the next cab off the rank. Zespri and growers work pretty collaboratively because none of us are competing against each other to innovate as much as we can. And there's always new things that we think we can do better as an industry and as growers.
So Andrew, you as an example, you will be doing multiple trials every year for Zespri on new varieties?
Yeah, so you can kind of break that into growers by themselves. Because we collaborate so much, we learn off each other, and that helps us be more productive and grow better crops. Then you've got growers interfacing with Zespri to assist them in trialing new techniques and varieties that are coming out of Zespri. We're obviously one of those growers. And then you've got Zespri themselves, who have a big bunch of people that are solely focused on innovating in terms of both management, technology, and variety technology. So if you think about the market as a whole, we're roughly 1% of the world's fruit bowl. So a very small piece of the fruit market. Zespri exports to about 56 countries globally. A valid question is how much of that goes to China? It's quite a topical question. The answer is about 27% by volume goes to China, or just over 30% by value. So relative to some other agricultural or horticultural type industries, we're not hugely overweight on China, and we're growing quite quickly in other markets outside of China. In terms of the Southern Hemisphere advantage, basically a good kiwifruit will store for 6 to 7 months after harvest, and that means that seasonality is really, really important. So in the Southern Hemisphere, we are the dominant player. The only other big producer is Chile, and their volume has been sort of net declining over time, as they haven't been able to compete on a productivity or price basis in Hayward kiwifruit, and only 3% of their production is gold. So we've got this kind of powerful position, and that's underpinned us building a really strong, Zespri building a really strong global brand. And then you've got growers in New Zealand who, through partially a really good climate, a really good environment to grow in, and partially through collaboration and innovation, are able to be nearly 50% more productive than the next most productive country.
Andrew, just a point you've made to me on a number of occasions is, how long have you been growing SunGold for? 10 years?
Yeah, and really you could say, look, the first two or three or 4 years of that, you really don't know what you're doing. So it's very young. We're learning a lot about how to grow better SunGold still every year, and you can see that in the national statistics. Yeah. We're all getting more productive over time, and none of us yet understand what the ceiling is there. That's an incredible variety, in that it just wants to produce good large quantities of good sized fruit that tend to taste relatively consistent and tend to store well.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide, guys. Just getting a message from the tech guys that the audio is not working properly. So I might
it's not bad, Andrew. It's just a bit up and down.
David, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, that's good. That's good.
David, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. But you can't hear me.
Sorry about that, guys. I got no sound, so I'll have to have a play here. I'm a bit of a technical dinosaur.
I can hear you, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. So sorry about that, guys. So if you sort of summarize what we've been talking about, you've got a really strong brand, a really strong supply chain, controlled supply, focused guys, 300 Zespri guys offshore in market, and
trying to grow demand ahead of supply is the key, isn't it?
And a really good environment here. So those have been key things that have made us successful over time as an industry. Really importantly, all growers and only growers have the opportunity to participate in the ownership of Zespri. So Zespri is owned 100% by growers. There's no compulsion for you to be a shareholder, but there's a lot of very good financial reasons why you would want to be a shareholder, and that enables you to participate right from the market back through to the orchard gate.
Yeah, much deeper exposure to the industry, and you know, the reality is the Zespri shares, I think they reflect a kind of liquidity discount to a degree, but as a result, they yield very strongly.
Yeah, they've yielded incredibly strongly over the last 5 years, and we really expect those yields to continue to be quite strong over the next 5 years. Let's keep going through to the next slide, guys. So if we've talked about the industry, we've talked about Zespri. If you think through SCH, you'd say, well, why do they do it? And this is kind of a summary of that. So we believe that we're here to enhance 4 key groups of people: our team, our customers, our shareholders, and our community. And we believe that we are able to do that best when we are creating and managing the best kiwifruit orchards we possibly can. So we've got a real focus on creating and managing world-class orchards. And when we're really good at that, we can enhance those 4 groups of people to the greatest extent possible. Our values are like rules of the game. So how somebody could expect me to treat them and I could expect them to treat me within the SCH business. And you'd say we're pretty focused on this. We're also very imperfect. So while we try hard, we sometimes fail at them. And when we do, we make a point of owning it. So, if you're looking for the kind of polished, shiny, perfect bunch of people, we're not them. But we're really authentic about what we believe with our mission and our purpose. And when we do it well, we try and double down and do it better. And when we don't nail it, we own it and solve the issue. So a bit of history. Family-owned business. It's a 3-way. SCH is a 3-way partnership between myself, my brother, and father. Those pictures are actually mum and dad and us boys. Mum and dad planted their first orchard in 1977, and we've been in the industry ever since. So we've grown up kind of living and breathing kiwifruit and sort of kiwifruit development, kiwifruit management. We've been through the ups and downs of kiwifruit, and there has been a few, and there will be a few in the future. These type of industries, they have great returns for long-term people. They don't tend to suit people that are sort of thinking speculatively in the short term.
Your involvement with the business sort of commenced at the time of PSA, didn't it? So it was a bit of a
largely because of PSA. Without PSA, I'd probably be a scarf-wearing academic, which wouldn't be good for anybody. So a bit about who we are. The picture on the left is our executive team. Basically, the business is sort of split to specialise in each of the different areas that are focused on creating and managing the world's best orchards. So we've got a nursery team that just focuses on growing the best possible plants, an infrastructure and construction team that does all of the consenting and infrastructure for new orchards, as well as the R&M on existing, an establishment team that focuses on the young orchards, so taking the plants from the nursery, putting them in, tending them up until their first crop, and then an ongoing management division which focuses on cropping mature orchards to a high standard. Around that, you've got the services, finance, people and culture, a machinery and contracting division, and a bit of other stuff that sort of ties in. But we've tried to design the business around what we want it to achieve, so that mission. There's around 100 of us permanent guys, and then sort of between our seasonal labour business, which I think today has about 170 people in it, there's sort of 200 to 400, including contractors. We develop sort of between 80 and 100 hectares a year of new orchards. In the last few years, as we've sort of hit that level, we've been adamant that we won't go over 100 because we don't want to sacrifice quality for quantity. We get really excited when we do a fantastic job. We don't get excited at all if we don't kind of meet our own standards. So quality over quantity is a big deal for us. As I think I mentioned earlier, we're not perfect, but we try hard to live the SCH values and to enhance those 4 key groups of people.
Andrew, one of the things that you and I have discussed a lot and makes a lot of sense to me as a kind of financial person, but is worth exploring. I mean, you don't build the cheapest orchards in New Zealand. Your orchards are built to last, and the economics of spending a little bit more and building them to last are pretty compelling when you think about the value that, you know, the price that you have to pay for license, for example, to and the price and the cost of building an orchard, and with the infrastructure, the irrigation, all of that, and the idea that 10% of the orchard is performing suboptimally it doesn't make good sense at all. So, number one, consistency of plants across the whole hectare, not 90% of the hectare, but also real quality in the construction, so that the orchard doesn't break and you don't need to go back into it. It just sits there and yields.
Yeah, that's true, provided you align with how we think about holding orchards long term. So for the people that are just kind of like do something and flick it, well, they can have a different approach. But if you're us and you think we're building an asset that we want to hold in the long term, and it becomes about cash yield, then when you're saying infrastructure is circa 20% of the total cost, it's worth spending that little bit extra to do it properly. We really don't want to go back and touch anything after we've done it, and we want it to support the best sort of sheltering, irrigation setups that we can have to grow great crops.
Yeah.
I think we've largely talked about this, so that's how the business is split up, but we might just keep moving, guys. David talks about quality of infrastructure. Fundamentally, infrastructure is important, but the thing that makes yield in an orchard is plants. So how we tend those plants and the different techniques the plants we use, the different techniques we use to try and get them to go quickly and produce crops quickly, really impacts how fast the orchard gets to cash flow, and then what the ongoing returns are. So the graph on the left, the gold bars are the ANZ kiwifruit report, which sort of models what they believe industry average to be. And then the white bars on the left are our average startup times and yields for newly developed orchards.
This is from planting, isn't it?
From planting. So not by being smarter than anybody else, but just by having a lot more practice and a business that's designed around how we do this well, we're able to get bigger crops quicker. And that really helps when you think about de-risking the project and also creating cash flow returns.
Yeah.
This orchard's an interesting case because it's actually going into Hereford Park. This is one of a much larger sort of family-owned set of blocks in the same location, about 1 kilometre as the crow flies from Hereford Park. This orchard has a 3-year average OGR of 204,000 a hectare, and it is going to go into Hereford Park, not because we particularly want to sell it, we don't, but because we think it adds some good characteristics to the partnership in terms of risk and cash flow. Just another example of an orchard. Note that the OGR in that one's particularly high for the 21 harvest. It managed to achieve some Kiwi Star as well as a high yield. In our IMs, we budget on much, much less than this. So when we're building an IM, we're thinking about, hey, we're trying to bring in partners who align with our values and align with the goals of the partnership. But fundamentally, we want to outperform what we say we're going to do. So we don't engage in window dressing of returns.
No, under promise, over deliver is a pretty constant theme. That is a huge OGR though, isn't it? 244.
Yeah, it is a big age. Yeah, this is another one just down the road. So these are all pretty close to Hereford Park. There's a big bunch of orchards that we run, own, or manage in the region.
Andrew, the last order, that is about what we're assuming in the IM, pretty close.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a reason why that's so different from the previous one?
It's just year on year. Like there's no reason that this year that orchard shouldn't be well above 200 from what we can see in it today. But it just depends. There's a number of drones of orchard gate return, and just the mix of getting those right. And sometimes you don't entirely crack it as well as you would like, and that's an instance of that. Like, at 185, we're not patting ourselves on the back. It has to be above 200 before we're happy with it.
Yeah.
Look, so same thing, bunch of orchards, our average versus industry average. All of that is to say, and this is all in the IM, is that we've focused on delivering excellence.
Yeah, and important to note, Andrew, the structures, the LPs include incentive structures which incentivise Southern Cross Horticulture to outperform the Zespri average. Those incentives don't kick in until you're at least 10% above the Zespri average, but they're important drivers to keep everybody aligned.
And really they only, like from an SCH perspective, those incentive structures only become valuable when you're north of 200,000 OGR.
Yeah, they don't kick in at the levels that we're assuming in the IM and the returns.
Whenever David and I sort of talk to people about coming into the industry, we're pretty adamant to talk through all of the risks. The easiest cases are when people have historical agricultural horticulture experience. But these are some of the major risks that are in horticulture and are in kiwifruit in particular. So if somebody's not comfortable with these risks, we never want them to come into the industry or into one of our limited partnerships. So let me just take you through these so that people have a good understanding of them. Biosecurity are events like PSA, and PSA shows you how severe those events can be. There's a number of either pests or diseases offshore that have the potential to cause significant issues if they're onshore. The most popular example right now is probably brown marmorated stink bug, which is a similar looking stink bug to what we have in New Zealand, but that can damage fruit crops. It's doing that in America, it's doing that in Europe. I think to some extent it's doing it in China. If that comes to New Zealand, it could have an impact. There are a number of risk mitigations that we are putting in place to be ready for that. The most common of which is to fully hail cover all gold blocks and have them set up so that we can keep stink bug out when we need to. So seam seal them essentially. Weather's a risk with horticulture. You can have periods of extreme wet, extreme dry, frost, hail, and there's a whole range of mitigations that we put in place in the orchard design and management to minimise these risks. Historically, we've lost almost nothing to frost in the last 25 years, less than half a hectare in one season. And we've lost very, very little to hail, and not much to the other events, but they're risks, right? So we're very exposed to adverse weather conditions. High cane is a product that is sprayed on once a year. It's a product that basically evens out the bud burst, and it's most important in warm regions to even your bud bursting, get a high percentage of buds on your canopy breaking. There's some suggestions that that might be phased out with a current review being done by the EPA. We don't know where that's going to land. If that does land, what will it mean for Hereford Park? Hereford Park, sort of a moderate temperature block, gets reasonable chill hours. We're pretty confident that we can grow through that without significant adverse impact. If we were very close to the coast in some regions of New Zealand that are very warm in the winter, like Northland or the Far East Coast, we'd be really concerned about that in G3. And in Hayward, we'd be very concerned about that nearly anywhere. Red tends not to need high cane. It throws a lot of flowers, so we don't see high cane having any impact really on red, and only a minor impact on gold in moderate to cold locations. Everybody's aware of the worker shortage. That's been a phenomena of the last 2 years, and I think you could probably say that's a function of the way that the border's being managed rather than growth of the industry. So that's been very, very tough. It's been really hard on our operational team in the last couple of years, and it looks like that'll continue until we see some policy changes.
How are you at Southern Cross Horticulture, Andrew? How are you you're not sitting waiting for this to come, are you? You're actually getting on the front foot in relation to seasonal workers?
Yeah, you can't afford to. So actually, we started up a seasonal labour business within Southern Cross Horticulture before those things became issues. So you could say we were fortunate, and the team have worked really hard to attract. I think about 170 people today, which is slightly over half of our total labour requirement in Orchard, which is employed directly by us, and the balance is coming through contractors. We're focused all the time on growing that number and trying to get the best people we can. It's been pretty difficult for the team. So that's a combination of people from the islands, Kiwis and backpackers. As you know, there's nearly no backpackers left in New Zealand. The unemployment rate is incredibly low, and most of the Pacific Islands are locked out from coming here or have a low cap on them. So that's been tough. It won't be forever, but it's tough in the short term. Licence is a risk. If you think at Hereford Park, the licence is acquired through a blind tender process. The rules of that have changed recently. We think that we can fit largely within the rule set at Hereford Park, although the final rules aren't out. But worst case scenario, it changes our speed only very slightly because of the way that the planning was staged. But getting the licence can be very difficult, and it's very, very hard to assess where you think the price is going to be when you put in your blind tender. If you miss on licence, you have to wait and go the next year. So that can be a tough thing, but it is a reality of some of these orchard developments, and that does happen to people. It's been pretty well publicised that China has taken and grafted gold 3. Last official count, I think there was something like 5,000 hectares of G3 in the ground in China, mostly in the Sichuan province. How much impact do you think that's going to have? So it's very hard to assess because you've got a country that already produces about 700 million trays of kiwifruit to our 180 million trays, and a third of that is already gold kiwifruit. So they produce vastly more gold than we do, and yet we've been profitably selling kiwifruit into China for many, many years.
A different variety of gold, though, isn't it, Andrew?
Many varieties of gold are grown in China, and there's some good varieties, but you've got a whole lot of structural elements in that and the setup in China that make it very, very difficult to achieve a set quality standard and a strong, trustworthy brand. Yeah. So, look, I'd be more worried. Yes, that is a concern, but I don't think it's a especially given that it's Northern Hemisphere production. I don't think it's an absolute major, but what is an issue is New Zealand's trade position with China. If we were to see some kind of antagonism between our two countries, then that could be painful for a few years to New Zealand growers. So that's a significant risk. And lastly, management's always a risk. So if we make mistakes, it can significantly impact the returns on orchard. We're pretty focused on not making mistakes, but mistakes happen. So management's always a risk, and everybody would be wise to think about that. The alignment is such that we're always, in almost all of them, we're far away the largest limited partner, and we invest on the same terms as everyone else. So we're very, very aligned with the success of the partnership. So we're very focused, and in fact, with all of our work, even for other people where we're not shareholders, we treat it with the same level of pride as if we owned it ourselves. That's a core tenet of why people use SCH. I think we've kind of covered that.
Yeah, we have, Andrew. I mean, the last point is just for me, this is agriculture, specifically it's horticulture. Things do go bump in the night sometimes in agriculture, and if that's not for you, then this is probably not for you. But I think that my observation, and I'm an investor alongside you, Andrew, in these, is that there's a lot of focus goes into managing risk, and while not all risks are manageable, a large number of them are, and you guys work very hard to manage them. Anyone who's seen the way a kiwifruit orchard is built these days will understand that it's kind of almost indoors these days, so that protection from whether it be wind or hail or extreme weather has increased greatly. Irrigation, frost protection, the protocols around people entering the orchard, which were as a result of the PSA outbreak, but have become part of the kind of standard practice at orchard. All of those things mean that the risks are mitigated pretty heavily.
Yeah, I think probably on the biosecurity one, it's important to note that during PSA, we set up as a bunch of growers an organisation called Kiwifruit Vine Health, who we all pay a trade levy to, whose sole focus is keeping external risks out. So that's what they think about every day, and they engage with MPI and other sort of people that control the border or are risks to bringing something in. They are very, very, very focused on keeping it out, and then if something did get here, they've created a pretty strong set of protocols around plant movement and other forms of movement like pollen to mitigate any spread. That was a real learning out of PSA. Let's jump to the next slide, guys. Yeah, so one of the things that I think is a really sort of valid thing to ask is why would we look for partners at all? And why we did this in 2018, I think it was, David, was that it was going to enable scale. We were looking at projects that by ourselves as a business and as a family operation might take us sort of 3 or 4 years. But with partners alongside us, we could keep going and do it in one hit, and that added a whole lot of efficiency to how things worked, and it also enabled us to take on projects of larger scale. So make no mistake, we do these things because we want to invest in them as well. But why we did it was because it enabled scale. It enabled us to take on projects that we couldn't do by ourselves.
The other thing, I mean, the going faster thing, Andrew, we've discussed, and I think you've always expressed it to me that you think the window on the SunGold opportunity, for example, will get narrower because the availability of really good suitable land with really good water resource and the license restrictions will mean that it's not going to be 750 hectares forever going into SunGold. So, I mean, I think right at the outset you said to me, this window may close or narrow. We've got to go more quickly and establish orchards. I mean, the best time to build an orchard was last year, and the second best time is this year. Get on with it, because the best orchards have suitable land with suitable drainage, climatic and drainage characteristics, and available water, and that's a limited resource.
Very much so. Very much so. And the consenting issues around all of that only get larger, not smaller over time. So getting those consents in place, turning those properties into orchards, and in that window is really important.
So Hereford Park's the first project that we've done, which is an interesting combination. So as Andrew outlined before, it includes the Harper Orchard, which is about 9.2 hectares of producing SunGold.
Actually, you can see Harper over to the left, guys. So the bit in the middle of your screen, sort of bottom up to the middle, is all Hereford Park. Hereford Park Stage 1 is right at the bottom of that picture. The whole Hereford Park is much bigger than Stage 1, but we're doing it in segments. And then the orchard over to the far left is Harper.
Right. So that's 9.2 hectares of producing SunGold, and then within the Hereford Park area, we're developing 31.6 hectares of SunGold greenfields, and a further 12.5 hectares of Ruby Red, of the new Ruby Red. So total area will be 53.3 hectares, which is a pretty substantial orchard. As you can see from the photograph, it's an area which has significant kind of orchard activity all around it, and obviously is pretty well suited, Andrew.
Yeah, there's been a lot of orchards put in that valley in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. We've done a couple in there on behalf of clients, and the performance of the orchards in there is really good.
Yeah. So our internal rate of return is 10.1% pre-tax over 10 years, and that is a combination of, as we said earlier, running yield, a degree of capital appreciation over time, and interestingly, because of we as Andrew said, we don't give tax advice, but because of the deductibility elements early in the project, the post-tax returns are kind of at a similar level if you can utilise those losses. Minimum investment, 250,000. Typically, in our previous projects, people have probably put a little bit more than that in on average, but we're certainly not going below that. And there's just a breakdown of the composition of the orchard. As Andrew said, in each of the partnerships that we've completed to date, the Dunstan Group has been the largest investor, and we have some pretty substantial other investors who've come along as well, but the Dunstans believe hugely in alignment. So they are a cornerstone in every project, and we think that's really important. Excuse me, that should be turned off. Probably flick on to the next slide, please. So this is where we are. You can probably talk a bit about this, Andrew.
Yes, we're about sort of 20 minutes from Te Puke. There's hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of hectares of kiwifruit within 10 minutes of this orchard, and surrounding it on 3 sides. It's a very well suited spot. Fertile soil, free draining, good sunlight characteristics, good water availability. It really has the core elements of what you need to develop a world-class orchard.
Look, we've been over this. Cash yield, primary driver, capital appreciation over time, and the potential to use cash to use deductible expenses to apply against other taxable income. And I think, importantly, Zespri shares can be the cream on top. Certainly in the partnerships that we've completed to date, the Zespri shares have provided a really kind of nice enhancement to the yields.
Yeah.
So as we said at the outset, it's really important that that the people who invest here are sort of genuinely wholesale investors, and there are a series of criteria under which you can invest. If you're in the investment business, if you're an investment professional, do you have a portfolio of specified kind of financial products of $1 million or greater? If you've transacted in financial products worth $1 million or greater during the recent period, and there, in addition to the specific categories, there is a self-certification category exemption whereby people can go to their accountant or lawyer and self-certify and get those professional people to confirm that they believe that they are qualified to make these type of investments. We really don't want people who invest and then come back to us later and say, well, look, I didn't really understand what this was all about. We are looking for people who either are sophisticated investors themselves or who have access to advisors who can help them through it. And look, there is a blanket, an investment over 750,000 automatically qualifies you as a wholesale investor.
Yeah, if people have questions about how that works, they can just call you, right, David?
Yeah. Please call me, and I can talk it through in a bit more detail. This, in terms of our next steps, we are seeking firm commitments from investors prior to Christmas. It's an awkward time to be doing it in the run up to Christmas, particularly with the year that a lot of us have had. But that's our current goal, and we would welcome the opportunity to engage more deeply with people who are genuinely interested. We have an information memorandum. We have limited partnership documentation ready to go, and we've kind of in the process of bringing together 4 of these projects to date, we've traversed all of the issues. So we're sort of we can respond to any questions that people have. Just call. The planting program is between 2023, when the gold is scheduled to be planted in summer and winter, and 2024 for red. And a lot of the timing there is driven by our ability to get the earthworks done, get the orchard built, and obviously secure a license, Andrew. First crop.
We're fortunate in that we're bringing a little bit of license in, so that's helpful.
Yeah, it is. And just so everyone understands the way that these, because these things run on a March year end, so all the cost associated with the crop goes into a year, and then the income arrives the following year. So that first crop is April 2025, but that will be reflected in the 2026 financial year through to March 2026. But the orchard will be producing cash flow from April 2025.
Yeah, if you said that you picked in March 25, you'd expect to see circa 70% of that cash flow before the end of the year.
Yeah.
And probably 30% within the first 2 months.
Yeah. So there are the details probably contact me in the first instance. If there's anything that I can't answer, then we'd involve Andrew. He's pretty busy. But in the meantime, if any of the people watching, and this is the kind of weird, we can't see you, so we don't know who's out there, but if you want to type in any questions that you have, we'll endeavour to answer them in the next 9 minutes. But otherwise, just give me a call and we can talk it through. We can get you a detailed information memorandum, and if necessary, we can arrange for you to go and have a look at the Southern Cross Horticulture operation and see the way that these people go about their business and get a bit more of a sense of the culture and the type of people who work there.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, guys, just fire away. Feel free to ask anything.
I think, Andrew, we'll just wait a minute. If we don't get any questions, then we'll sign out.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening in, and hopefully we will hear from you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All the best.